principles of lust are burned in your mind. Do what you want. Do it until you find love.
From 8,500 feet off the peaks of the Rocky Mountains, this is Truth Frequency Radio with Chris and Cherie Geo. Wherever you are, make it TFR.
The enlightened mind is often dulled by the normalities of daily life. If they somehow become isolated from others that are uniquely inspired, let us shine forever to serve as a beacon for those sailing the seas of time. We have Sevan Bomar back on the show with us for the next 2 hours, maybe even 3, most likely 3, knowing Sevan from past shows. And we're going to talk about the frequency of gravity, the keymaker. What is the frequency of gravity? We've talked about gravity in the past in the context of flat Earth. And I'm pretty sure, 99.999% sure, that gravity isn't the result of the spinning of the Earth that is binding us to the Earth itself. Because when you're on a merry-go-round, you're actually being thrown off of it as opposed to being stuck to it. So gravity in the traditional sense doesn't make too much sense to me. But actually, just a couple of weeks ago, somebody mentioned, what if gravity is actually more of a frequency than anything else? And synchronistically enough, Sevan has come up with that exact same analysis at this particular juncture. So it makes me wonder if we're really all just tapped into this universal consciousness that we're pulling all of this information out of. And that's why we're all coming to these same conclusions. I only get the headlines when I get these downloads. Sevan gets the whole chapters and the books and the 3-part series. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say on the topic of the frequency of gravity. Sevan, how are you doing, sir?
You know how it is. I'm charged up. You know, I just wanted to say wholeness and balanced vibrations to everyone. It's amazing to be here and to still be broadcasting strong.
Excellent.
Like, all of what we have to contend with. And that's a real thing.
It has been rough. There are definitely elements out there that want to stop this. And I wouldn't even go so far as to say, I would take it a step further and say that it's not just elements in the alternative meter or around our circle, but ultimately what we're dealing with are these frequencies, these darker frequencies that are using these people as vessels to try to stop what we're doing here, not because what we're doing in the physical is so important, but because what we're doing in the spiritual and the energetic levels is really just snowplowing this consciousness shift. And there's so many people who are raising their vibration because they sit here and listen to people like you and I.
Well, I've got a really good eye on what exactly is happening and how it occurs. Like you said, it's all frequencies and diametric opposition. So you can really sum it up. But I want to have kind of a disclaimer before today, because before I start talking about this particular topic. And it's because, it's a real life-changing principle. But that also means that one would need to stick with it and then to eventually click that final tumbler in the lock for many people. And that's why this is called the keymaker, because there's going to be some things that are discussed, and it's just going to put everything together so that we actually are able to really move on. Right? Because, there's a big need for all of us to get ready to go into just into that next stage of our existence. And it's not these micro stages either, because, I can change emotions, I can change frequencies just a little on the dial, but I'm still so close to the main station, I can even hear it. We're talking about how to completely tune out all of what's going on and begin to tune into just what really needs to be discovered, so that one could begin to make the real progress, because this is a loop. So it's more or less like stasis. You can just find yourself really repetitively doing the same things that's in a certain range. And if one is not familiar with like more expanded ranges, that little small range could even be enough for them. So you know how some people, they just, they only need a little bit, and why others ask a lot of questions and they start to be very inquisitive about what's happening in the reality. And, one of the main things that before we start also, I wanted people to put into their mind as some keywords, which is probably when you want to get your pen and paper, if you can find one. I know some people are like, oh man, I got to go back manual, pen and paper. Let me get my cell phone. But there's some keywords here. And the first keyword is moons. The second keyword is emotion. The third keyword is the ocean. Fourth keyword, waves. Frequency. Receptacles. Vessels. Some people are like, you're going too fast. Memory capacity. And space. And what I'm going to do by the end or the beginning, as you'll see, of today's show, is that I'm going to clarify how all of that is rolled into the same thing. So that way, anything that we want to address as far as the concept of what's happening in the physical reality, we can sum it up rather fast. It's like we can just make it loop itself so that we realize what's going on. And then we begin to nullify all of the basically the static and the interference. That's really what the word I'm looking for, the interference of the frequency. And I guess the first place to start, though, very briefly, I just want to go over a basic overview of what goes on outside the body. And the reason is because, I've been on quite a few trips. I think I'm going into trip 80 or trip 90 at this point of just, flying around the expanse. And I thought it important the other day to at least, write down what I know about these different expanses and what they contain, just so for a record, because, sometimes, we never just address that directly as what's going on outside, which I actually find out is inside. But that's a little bit difficult to take at first. But what people call is OBE, or the out of body experience. And before we get into that, though, I want to see maybe if we wanted to take a break, or, because that's like the first part of this, because once you understand what happens in those spaces, then when I get into the heavy stuff, it's all going to make perfect sense about like how this is really set up, how it's designed, how you can get out of this labyrinth, this maze. And then also why it's so important for us, like in our particular biorhythm, everyone on Earth right now present.
Well, we're going to be hitting the break here in about 2 minutes, but okay. Let me ask you this before we do. Yeah. You mentioned moons and flying around. We flew around during the supermoon, and I've got to say, it felt like there was this force down upon us, this very tyrannical force that was pushing down on us. It made things very, very intense that evening, and not in a good way. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, some of my friends, when it's time for them to fly and they find out it's the full moon, they just cancel the flight because realistically, there's you get people and they don't have your ticket and the baggage is all crazy, but there's a reason for this. And I am going to need a bigger segment to start it without getting interrupted. But I do want to say that that's definitely something that's going to be addressed during the show. And it's going to be addressed in a way as not a theory, but something that you can, based on your own experience in life, say, yeah, that's happened. Because we do have a part of us, especially now, those of us who've become very advanced, that will just nullify something anyway, just so it doesn't have any power over us. And that's also the reason why our movements have started, because we've released people from that whole oligarchy, and then also the Godhead and all the rest of the things that want to be on top of them. But now you're starting to clear the fog and get to the source. That means the meaning of all of this. And what we'll begin to see very clearly is how that's also what affects what one person is experiencing versus another, and how they feel about it. I'm just clipping my conversation here, but it's a real thing that you'll find people running around. It doesn't seem like they're going through pretty much of anything, while you feel like you're right in the face of it. And it's because in your orbit, you're getting closer to the source, while they may be plutonian.
For those of you just joining us, we're speaking with Sevan Bomar, one of our regular guests and favorite people to have on True Frequency, one of our dear friends as well. He asked us to write down a few keywords, and for those of you that missed it, it is moons, emotion, ocean, waves, frequency, receptacles, vessels, memory capacity, and space. And these are all going to tie in over the course of the next 2 or 3 hours while we're speaking to Sevan. So Sevan, please take us away.
That's right. Okay, so let's do some work here. Let's do some building because this is some heavy duty stuff, and let's get to it. So the first thing to do again, we're going to just talk about this out of the body thing very briefly, so we can get some sound principles about the space that we're actually in and how it really looks. Because when we get these stories about people coming out of the body, we have to realize that these stories are generally coming from people who all of a sudden find themselves getting out of the body, whether they were in a car accident or whether they're going through some extreme trauma. It basically means that they switched frequency so fast, they tore, in a sense, themselves out of their own framework for a moment. And this is why the word tear, as in, crying, actually is synonymous with actually tearing your aura and tearing your vehicles. So that way they start to leak or precipitate. And this is why the body is a vessel. Even if you run real fast, you start to precipitate sweat. If you poke a hole or someone gets shot, they say put pressure on that wound. Why? Because the body is pressurized. So if you have open areas or tears, then essence starts to leak from you. Okay? So just remember that a lot of these people coming out of the body, they have no knowledge of adepthood in metaphysics. So they generally go through this story about, and you've heard them before, so I don't need to recite them here, but it's, I met this person, and then they said this, and then there was this great light, and then I saw Jesus, and then this and this. And this doesn't give us any idea of what's going on Earth Prime or the map of Earth Prime. So we're going to talk about how these layers, if you may, of our body actually correspond to the layers of reality. And we're going to break them down into the least amount of layers as possible. And so these layers are synonymous with bodies, okay? And these bodies are synonymous with vehicles. And you can travel into these different spaces or layers when you get into those vehicles. But generally, if you're doing this professionally, we'll say it that way, you have to have fuel for that vehicle. Just like the one you jump in outside, you need gas. So for the astral vehicle, the first one, which we call the 4D body, it runs on prana. So the more prana you've built up in your body, and you could do that through crystals, you can do that through breathing, you can do that several ways, the easier it is to fuel the 4D body. And those who start to really deal with it first, they start to lucid dream, and then it goes on from there. But remember, because it runs on prana, if you happen to run low on prana, then it does mean it'll inhibit your ability to go into lucid dreaming or even get out of this body into that body. Okay. So the next thing is that this particular body that you would get in first, let's say, the next body over, this is the one that people see things in the world when they're in that body. Meaning you actually can still see, you can generally see your own body first. That's generally as it starts. And then you start to seem to float until you're getting somewhat of a bird's eye view of everything. Okay, now the adept actually knows how to not float. And basically, because when you keep floating, you're going to go up into the next firmament or into the next body. But the adept knows how to weigh themselves down so that they actually stay on the plane and start to view basically this world, but in another scope. And this is like where the people say, I saw this ghost. This is because that body more corresponds to this particular plane that I'm talking about. And when you're going through this particular plane, you can see things that have left very strong signatures in the reality. Meaning if someone got super excited there or someone got killed there, you will see that continuously repeating itself. You can see where rituals have been done. You can see most things, especially based on your eye of penetration. You can see most things that have been done in the space, mainly things also that have been done in secret. Because generally when something is done in secret, there's a certain frequency that's present, the secret frequency, if you may. And so this is what that first body is about, and that first body outside of this one. And you'll also notice as a final thing that you're actually able to see through dense objects like walls. You can see as you focus right through one wall, through the other wall. And this is because the body that you're in, which is actually an inner space, can see through the pores. The eye that you're using is seeing through the pores or the hole in the reality that you were recently in, so it can see right through those dense, slow-moving objects. The next body over, it allows you then, and let me catch up with my notes here, because I'm really saying this so people get a general idea. Triangulate yourself before we go on this journey here in a moment about what this is actually all about, this existence called planet Earth. So, as I said before, you see things playing over like a record. The adept who can control their experience in this space does discover and see things. And this is how someone can come back and say, hey, the FBI use these kind of people. They get them to determine who really committed crimes. Yes, I see where she's buried. I see exactly what's going on. This is what those people are used to doing, using this body. Dr. Monroe was one of the first people to work for and be coerced by agencies to begin to, well, actually Ingo Swann was, but this was when it hit really more of the public stream, because Dr. Monroe was actually publishing books about his journey. And he wrote in his memoirs that once he started having oversight, meaning government agencies getting interested in what he was doing and watching him, there seemed to be a strange manipulation over his research. And thus his final papers before he died were seized and completely manipulated before they came out with the final series, because people were getting too close to the source or the meaning of it all. It's like going closer and closer to the sun. It's going to start getting so hot, but this means something else in our physical reality. The heat and the pressure is going to turn up to a point where some will turn back. They'll actually go and even pray to their old God again, or jump back into their old frequencies again when it gets too crazy around them. They'll think, oh, maybe I did the wrong thing. Maybe I made the wrong turn. So this next body, this is known as the realm of truth, because in the next body, it's only light and shapes. You don't actually see any more dense matter. What you see is the light and the shape that corresponds to the densities of the objects that you used to be able to see in physicality. The reason why this is known as the realm of truth, because nothing can cloak itself in misperceptions and deceptions. See, physical bodies are even deceptions. So we'll talk about this when we come back.
That's very interesting. I've been to these realms that you're speaking of, and you're absolutely right. These objects are there, and maybe it's nothing more than what we see here, except from a higher perspective. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. Don't go anywhere. When people travel, astral travel, they encounter what they refer to as the veil. The veil is the breaking point between this dimension and that dimension. But would you say, Sevan, and this might be a little bit off point, but would you say that once you hit this veil, it's like looking at the other side of a mirror? You pass through this mirror, and then you see from the opposite perspective, rather than entering an entirely new realm.
For sure. I mean, you always stay on point, because that's exactly in the notes that there's a mirroring of what goes on. And once that refraction hits that first time, it weakens the light. It weakens the frequency. So how it appears the next time, it just looks different, but it's coming from the same source. And that's the mastery of refraction. And this is just, it's somewhat like a parabolic mirror. It looks distorted, but it still is an actual reflection of, the source or the prime cause of things, which we're actually going to drive into tonight. Like even this whole part right now in the beginning is just get people to gear up this vessel for this travel, because this is what we do. I mean, a lot of people are already very familiar with this. Some people are already some people are just getting started, but truly, it's just, I don't want to say anything before I'm supposed to say it, because, even when you say certain things, it'd be like halfway into the message. Another thing is, man, the ads are they got me going over here, because they're just so well thought out. I'm just trying to stay on track here, but nobody.
Vote for nobody. Nobody will take away your liberty. Nobody will do this. Nobody will do that.
Yep.
That's Nathan Frazier of Live Free FM.
If
awesome.
Nobody wins, and everybody wins.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, it just genius. So yeah, okay. So let's just keep going through this, but it's definitely what you said, and we'll get to that part of the conversation. And then you'll be like, "Aha, I knew it." And so as we drive into this next plane, meaning the next body over, not the ghost body, but the next one over, is the reason why as we talked about, it's known as the realm of truth because there's no cloaking. Everything is actually in light and in geometry. But the thing is that people need to realize right off that you don't actually experience this plane until you really start working on your vehicles. You know, you may see it as a glimmer. You may have a good day on the parallax, meaning it just so happens the stars are positioned right and everything's lined up for you. And then you all of a sudden have this crazy experience that you can't seem to reduplicate. That happens. But to get there professionally, as I keep saying, meaning you can do it on cue, this particular stage is only really populated with macrobes and builders. Okay. Builders are adepts. You can't really say who they correspond to, who they work for, because it's a vast range. It would just be like trying to name the experience of every single person on the planet and what actually got them here on the planet. So you have different kinds of builders that learn how to get into this space one way or another. And the reason why we separate them from macrobes is because they still operate remotely like what me and you operate as, but they operate in groups. It's like when you watch Dune and those guys came in with the pyramid all on them, and then they got in the pyramid shape and they all moved in the same movement. And that keeps them phased into that frequency as a partial collective. Okay. Even the Rosicrucians do this. They have a symbol and they find that symbol when they get to the next space, the ghost realm. Then they go right through the door and they only walk through doors with that symbol. Okay. So this is what a builder is. A macrobe is something entirely different. I haven't personally been able to fully identify where they come from or what they are, but they're like blobs. They're just huge, vast states of consciousness that are just more familiar with merging with numerous forms in order to gain hypersentience. They don't have the whole, this is my club, this is your club, this is my frequency, this is your frequency. They want to merge to maintain their hypersentience. That's how they actually are even communing. And this would be like if you've seen a blob just pass over everything, it would swallow everything up. And then it would become just interconnected with that. It's not actually trying to control it. It's not trying to do any of that. It's like just in it for a massive experience. And this is akin to an oversoul, if that doesn't make sense to a person. A macrobe is an oversoul. It's basically, in a nutshell, in computer speak, a multi-core processor harmonizing itself based on resonance. So whatever resonates close enough to what frequency it's on, it merges with. So that's that space. Now, beyond that space is now the onset of pure energy. And the reason why this space has to be denoted is because it is actually an actual space you can enter. But few perceptions and senses can survive beyond this point. Your senses and perceptions actually just become overwhelmed rather fast. And if you can tap into any thoughts that's going on, it's just saying join, merge, oneness. And in this state, there's a complete loss of identity. If you remain there for a prolonged period, ideas like I'm James, I live on Earth, I have a daughter, all that just gets blown away. And this is why many adepts call this the danger zone, because it's actually where you can literally lose your mind. It's a literal thing. You know, say, oh, he lost his mind. Because that whole idea of separation and, you know, your numbers and your name and all these different identities basically are now being merged into one massive ball of energy. You actually can lose your mind. And the saying for this is that you lose yourself, but you find it all. And beyond that, as you're watching, if you can hang in there long enough, now remember, you're getting closer and closer to the source, so you can literally feel the force and the energetic potential of whatever it is that you're getting closer to. And what you start seeing as you peer into it is you see these portals. And they're configured in the strangest geometry. They're like complex keyholes. And it's clear that the energy that's coming through those keyholes is beginning its initial phase of being shaped, formed, and fashioned. So this is where the fashioning of pure energy is taking place, as it's being like extruded. If you notice that there's extruder is like Play-Doh, where you push the Play-Doh through the extruder, it comes out as a star. Or even a 3D printer, there's an extruders up there. The ABS plastic pushes itself through the extruder and actually takes on another form. So this is what you're dealing with there. We're coming to a conclusion, because beyond that, there's only knowledge written about what actually goes on beyond that. There's not an actual being that has ever been there. And this place is known as the subjective plane. And there's a substance, this is where the substance that fills everything and doesn't operate on thoughts and comprehension. It is unhindered. It's untamed. It's wild. It's unbegotten. So it hasn't been born. So it doesn't have time as its equation. So that makes it limitless. Now, the interesting part is we've all been at that point before, but we would never know, because what we use to quote unquote know doesn't exist there. So the last thing is most actually think that they're going outside of the body, or they subscribe to this idea that we're going outside the body. And this is leading to go into space and find much more distorted forms. Generally, in this case, since you're using the organic vehicles, not the external machines, you're going inward into inner space. So what this is like you're coming into a place, we have spaceships, you're about to take off with us, and now you've got the general layout, so let's do it.
You know, Sevan, we spend trillions and trillions of dollars on research on how to get to the outer reaches of the solar system and hope that one day we can get to the edge of the universe. But all we really need to do is just go inside. It's right there. It's always been right there waiting for us. The shaman knew this thousands of years ago, and we're now starting to realize this in this archaic revival that we're all experiencing. Take us away, please.
Indeed, agreed. You know, it's okay. Well, you know, I guess the first thing is to say is, you know, I'm Sevan. I'm your pilot this evening, and we're going to be taking a trip through your own vessel, because that's how this works. Is that it's not actually, you know, about me in this, and that's why I like, you know, what you said about in the beginning, that this is not about finding a leader. This is about finding yourself. And that's all I'm doing. And the main thing is also don't make anyone else responsible for your happiness, because you remain powerless. That's how you release your power. It's important for you to find yourself. And these keys are going to let you do that. They're going to allow you to really see what is self. So we're going to take off. Now, the first thing is that you got to realize that generally when you roll in an unidentified vessel. It's like having no plates. You have no tags. You have no license. So what I'm saying is that generally before you come into vessels like this, or receptacles, which are planets, you are generally unidentified. So this state in particular, which I can identify for you, is very similar to the spark that's sent into water that actually forms a single-celled life form. Okay, so before this actual existence, you are generally a spark. You know, some would like to call it the all-spark. And now when this all-spark is making its trip through these spaces, what it starts to become aware of is actually the frequency of gravity. And now I'm going to explain to you exactly what the frequency of gravity is. So let's say, for instance, you end up getting a macro vessel. This is like, you know, vast state of consciousness. And you come by a marble like Earth. And at first, it would seem so small until you did something like touch it or put it on your chest. And the reason why I say that is some people, they're familiar with this. You take the crystal and you put it on your body, And then you lay down there and you close your eyes and you start breathing. And then when you get into that subtle form and that subtle state, you can start feeling the energy from the crystal.
Right. You know, it's funny you mentioned this at this particular time because about a year and a half ago, one of our listeners sent us a whole bunch of crystals and we were using them at the time. And then when we moved, we put them away, didn't really think about them and just got them out yesterday. So it's kind of charged them. Yeah, it's kind of synchronistic. And charged them back up. We just did this morning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there it is. So imagine in the macro body, when you see Earth, see, the first thing you got to realize is since we're down here on the Earth, it's easy for us to understand. Now, the Earth's got tons of stuff. Not only does it have all these elements, like everything on the periodic table, it's also got all these memories of all these beings that have been here. It has hatred, torment, laughter. It has all these other emotions. It has all that stuff. So as the macro, when you start to even look at Earth as the unidentified vessel, more like when you begin to look at Earth, you can feel something. And this feeling is actually the collective frequency of everything here. So just imagine how it feels. And because it's actually a light and a sound, this is like a tone or some music of a song that you really like. And you like it because it's different. But this is the first part of the attraction, because that's what gravity is. It's an attraction. It pulls things in. So as you're being pulled in your unidentified vessel, the allspark, the next thing is that there's a demand for you to take an ID. See, nothing is different anywhere outside of these layers until you get really far from here. It's the same thing we deal with in the physical reality. As above, so below. Where are your tags? You need an ID. And how this comes across is the frequencies that you begin to hear in the song. Some of the parts of the song, you start to nod your head. And you're like, man, I really like that frequency. And so when you do that, you take the clothes, meaning that the actual component or correspondent, just like we were talking about, that there's only lights and it's only geometry, you actually clothe your spark in that. So all this stuff that you're starting to hear and all these different things, it's just wafting you, the sounds and the smells, and you clothe yourself with that. That actually comes out later on as your organs, the heart, the liver, the kidneys. All these have specific frequencies. So these are the clothes that you put on, because this is actually the core frequencies of what's emitting from this particular space. And this attraction begins to pull you in, because what it's actually doing is it's anchoring you. It's grounding you. I don't want people to go into the whole darkness about, oh, we're not supposed to be here and I knew it, I'm trapped. Just leave all that alone and make the journey. Because you'll see how all of this connects, how good actually does connect to evil, which is a conundrum for most people who are actually stuck in one particular mind state. See, you can't be good or bad. You must be neutral.
You're right. Because this world is, or this physical plane is, duality, up and down, left and right, good and evil. The problem that we're facing, that I'm here fighting, is an unnatural evil, an unnatural darkness that is throwing the balance completely off. We're trying to bring it back to balance, but there is this unnatural evil that has crept into this matrix.
That's the end of the tale.
Oh, I didn't mean to jump all the way.
See old Ouroboros, the serpent that eats his tail, is actually what we're going to be getting into tonight. Because when you just sit back for a moment and you even ask yourself, well, based on that, why would there even be any physical incarnations? Like, who would actually create physical incarnations if I can just ride in this un-ID vessel? And this is how you, and we're not going to skip ahead here, but this is the meat of this.
Well, let me give you let me give you an
Go ahead.
example. Just recently, as I mentioned in the first segment, we were hit with a pretty bad DDoS attack. We found a vulnerability in our infrastructure, and we patched that up, and we heightened our security as a result. Had that DDoS attack not happened, we still would have had that hole in the infrastructure. But because that happened, we were able to level up as a result. So I would say that's why we encounter the negative frequencies, because the negative frequencies push us to elevate ourselves.
Yeah, well, it's a simple principle. There's nothing in the physical reality that doesn't contain two sides. If we somehow make ourselves believe that that's not true, then we've only fooled ourselves. Happiness brings sadness. I mean, the two are in a boat together. This is why it's so easy for a person to flip-flop between those two polarities. Because the real stage, see, basically as a neutral person, the only thing that good and bad is going to be doing with you all the time is trying to get you to join one side or another. And because good feels good, it attracts versus repels. Bad repels. It makes you jump away. Someone says, rah, you jump back. You put your hand in the fire. You pull it back really fast. So one pushes, the other one pulls. So this and that particular force is gravity.
I want to ask you about my own personal journey. Maybe you can offer some advice, and maybe it'll help some people out there. About 2 or 3 months ago, I was last time we had you on, as a matter of fact, I was on a really fast track. I decided to go completely vegetarian. I was partaking in the shamanic ceremonies at least 2 or 3 times a week, and the weight was just dropping off of me. I was really transforming. I lost about 50 pounds. Since then, I gained about 10 back, and I'm a little disappointed with myself. But what happened is, after about 3 weeks of doing this, my body started freaking out and demanding meat. As a matter of fact, it got so bad that Cherie and I were at each other's throats. And once we both ate a steak and got the protein that we were lacking, everything went right back to normal. But there was definitely a big desire for protein, not in the physical body, not in the taste buds, I should say, or even the stomach saying, hey, I want a steak. It was more of the chemical makeup of the body saying, hey, something's missing, you need to eat a steak. After that, it didn't go downhill, but the progression that I was experiencing kind of slowed down. And I experienced the exact same thing that you talked about on the last show. When you are swinging in one way, all of a sudden the pendulum comes back and boom, like completely in the same velocity, but on the opposite side of the spectrum. So how do we find that balance?
Well, what we talk about is if a person can't generally quit cold turkey, literally. If you I always like that one. But then you just switch to terrain modification, which is basically a 6 month or to 1 year period of a transition. And then because there's some real chemistry to it, especially, blood type and things like that make a difference. But generally what it narrows down to is the creatine, as we talked about, the creatine monohydrate. The egg whites, the egg whites actually tapers off the urge to get the meat protein, because the meat protein actually will become an urge because the body knows what it wants and it knows where it generally gets it from. And it's an animal protein. So there's a vegetable protein. And, these doctors, man, it's just like these people who are doing the medical thing. We already know that they don't know what they're talking about, but it's because this stuff is common sense, just like what we were saying with the bodies. That we have a vegetable body, obviously. And see, during that particular time where you were going on those sessions, the vegetable body had the most fuel. So it's also demanding, hey, don't go back into the animal body because I'm trying to stay into this frequency for maximum absorption. But the gonad, which I just love the name because it just sounds like that guy, the gonad will demand and fight to get this animal protein so that its body can stay alive. And when you deal with people who, like in the East, let's say, for instance, and they test the energies, they segment them like Ming energy, the difference between that and prana, when they really put it into the right categories, they talk about that the bodies, and this is where the neutral has to come in at, to answer your question, that the bodies need to be equally fed. And the best thing that you can do for the animal body, even something that I'm doing now, is just the egg whites, not the egg yolk. For that person that has that kind of blood type, and also because many of us who are real in the field, meaning that we actually have to deal with the physical side of things a lot. It's important for us to stay strong, actually physically strong. This corresponds to the physical side of the body. And that's why the creatine, the animal protein, and the complete vegetable protein, when combined, form Captain Planet. No, serious. It's where now you can actually you stabilize. But if you're missing either one of those, because it's a formula, there can literally be a backlash. Like it can manifest as actual physical issues, some mental issues, anger, these kind of things, because it's almost like heroin in a sense. You just quit cold turkey. There's going to be some withdrawal. But for some of the people, now let's just put it into perspective though. Some people, when they get into a certain kind of state of mind, like they just had it, they're fed up. This generally happens when something major occurs. There's so much energy in their body that shifts into that other pole of one of the other bodies. They're actually able to subdue most of their desires and things that are related to physicality and actually do away with them for a certain period even. You see what I mean? So this is different for each person, but if you look behind the scenes, this is what's going on. So to feed the bodies equally is really the best way to stay neutral. And then if you know, like, okay, it's getting wintertime, I need to basically be in the vehicle with the 4x4, because you have to be able to look into the cosmos and see what kind of terrain we're going through next and what would be the best vehicle to endure that terrain. And I learned this because one of my friends who actually went and studied to become a Dogen master, the first thing that this master told him was, because he was on the veggie diet, he said, if you want to be the Dogen, because remember, this is a cult, so it's got a whole different guideline, you're not going to be able to do it as a vegetarian, because the entities that you're going to deal with, just because remember, this is their culture, this is their cult, you won't be able to get through those entities because they will basically rip your vehicle to shreds. So you see how there's more to it.
That makes sense. Yeah. And you know what? I kind of channeled that same kind of information. There was a voice telling me, look, the warrior needs meat. You just have to face it. That's just part of this, because you need your strength as far as that goes. I got a really nice filet mignon, and it was, really nice $20 organic grass-fed filet mignon from the organic grocery store. But then that led to lamb chops, and then that led to more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. And I'm like, slope. Yeah, exactly. And I'm sitting back. Yeah. So now we try to only have meat once every 2 weeks.
Well, yeah. And actually, let me put it to you very, very clearly. Not you directly, but someone who's looking to find that next one up, let's say, but in that same dynamic, will go to metal. And that's why when you take the first 4 letters of metal, what does it spell? The first meat. 4 letters of metal spells meat.
It does.
Because it's another kind of meat. And imagine it's like a Thor hammer. Imagine smacking one of those things in the face with the high alloy metal, because that's running through the body. But remember, this would be like you have this car that runs on unleaded gasoline, and now you want it to be diesel. So now this is what terrain modification is. You got to spend 6 months basically re-altering your DNA. Like some people, they started using different kind of fuels in their car because they were cheaper. Some people put the HHO on there. Now they're using hydrogen and they use less gas. So this is the same concept in a sense. You would reconfigure the vehicle to burn on another fuel. And it took me, I'm on 12 years of a vegetarian. I only got it right, because also every age is there's a segment of ages where there's a different stage. And because it basically, to make it simplify it becomes very difficult to produce a certain kind of energy at a certain age. Like different energies are more abundant at a certain age because it corresponds to that actual layer and vessel of consciousness or frequency that you're using then. And then when you go into that next phase, that body dies. It's like the sheath coming off of the serpent. The skin is shed.
I do look forward to the rebirth, though. It's a constant rebirth, and I'm at another stage of another rebirth, and so is TFR, so is a lot of our listeners out there, so very synchronistic that we're talking about this at this particular time. Don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to pick it back up here in 2 minutes.
According to the Institute for Stem Cell Biology and Regenerative Medicine at Stanford Medicine, that's Stanford University, every one of us completely regenerates our own skin every 7 days. A cut heals itself and disappears in a week or two. Every single cell in our skeleton is replaced every 7 years. So every 7 years, you literally have a new skeleton because every single cell in your skeleton regenerates itself. We are speaking with Sevan Bomar about this fascinating subject because he's not just talking about the physical body. He's talking about the different layers of bodies that we all carry around with us in this incarnation. Sevan, take us away.
For sure. And, just to chime in on that, the reason why it's these kind of increments in matrices is because the number 7 actually can't be divided. So it can actually be divided into a circle perfectly. So because we're beings that can't be divided into a circle or a square perfectly, meaning that we always feel like, hey, this circle, man, it seems like we're doing the same thing over and over again. And then the square, oh my goodness, do I need to say anything about the square and the robotic programming? So we don't feel like that's us. And in this particular geometric structure, the 7 is often put on to those who are moving in the sequence of their non-conforming side. They call that outside of time. So this is witnessed not only within the geometry, but it's also witnessed within the numbers themselves, just for those who are asking themselves the question of why these increments? And this is the reason. So the next thing is because now, we've already taken off, but we're going to be entering some pretty turbulent territory. So I want those that are listening to hold on to your hats and also maybe put your seatbelt on, because the big thing now is that we're looking for the breakthrough.
Oh, let's look for the breakthrough. Take us away.
All right. Well, here it is. So the first thing is, because, this is a real adept conversation. Now, the conversation has an official level of notation to it. So what I'm saying is this is an adept level conversation. This is for adults. This is not for kids. This is for you already know what's going on. You just need to fess up to it. And now you need to know what exactly to do in order to get yourself into expansion. And that's the breakthrough. So the first thing is that many that get onto the threshold, because remember, it's one thing to just eat all the information and just feed the logical mind and the whole brain, feed the brain, which corresponds to the maze and the labyrinth, to feed that entity. But it's another thing to actually go into the experience, we'll just call that ayahuasca or diamond tree. You see, it's another thing to go into that experience, because even the onset of that, I would say probably 60% of the people who ever go into those fields don't actually go back in again, because there's too much anxiety and too much fear about going in and getting into those spaces that they virtually don't know what's going to happen and how to even control it. So this is why the big breakthrough comes in us realizing, and this is what happened to me. I was sitting back one night and I got a chance to get into the bathtub to really just boil it all off. And as I was sitting there, this strange presence came over me. And it said, now it's a technique that I use. I ping off myself, because I know I'm not talking to anyone beside me. So there's no one to fall down and worship and try to get their name and their telephone number and their geometry so you can call back later. Some people say, well, give me the name that you called. So this was one of those scenarios where the presence of yourself comes over you and says, are you going to wait until you have to bury them? And I'm like, man, come on, man. I'm just trying to relax. I've had a hard day. All the stuff going on with all the internet and all this stuff. Are we going to go into this now? And it was like, you serious? Like, I don't even understand where you're at right now, because you're playing around in time. And while you don't believe in it and don't subscribe to it, these other people around you, especially the ones that you care about, which looks like all of them at this point, they've still bought into the whole time thing. So you're going to end up burying them. So imagine your sorrow. Because if you don't keep pushing and you don't keep breaking through, you won't have the answer for them or you. So we're going to do some dynamics here, some diametrics, if you may. I'm going to show you how to cancel out fear with sorrow so you can get rid of both of them. And that way you can have that breakthrough that you need to have because we got things to do. And you're hanging out in time. So this is something that people should really start to try. Is we do have people around us that we care dearly for. And if you're the only one, especially on your biorhythm or in your family, your city, or your town or whatever, that may break through, you have to start weighing whether you're going to keep staying back there and not making the breakthrough, even though you're the most viable candidate. And then let time keep going by, which it will. Remember, this thing will keep running. It's not like people think. They think that it's just going to blow up. No, it's not. It's going to keep running. And the wheel of time is going to run over some people unless you do something about it. And to even get the kind of framework that you need, because this is when you're really an adult, when you're not just buying into the Save the World He-Man program, and you start realizing what's really going out here. There's people that eat people, and it's none of your business. Meaning that there's black forests across the other side of the world with people and things that are doing stuff that you haven't even been briefed about yet because you're still in preliminaries. So in order to graduate preliminaries, get the breakthrough, you have to realize that it's up to you now. And this is the beginning of how you start to really put this together, not just on the right side of your brain or the left side of your brain, but in the corpus callosum, on the bridge. Very clear, knowing both sides of things, not just one. Because you could be caught off guard if you don't see that happiness leads to sadness, and you don't want to believe that. Or that attraction, which we think is good, can actually come out as what we believe is evil when attraction has pulled you into a prison. So this is real talk. If you're gliding by and you hear some great tones and everything, and then you decide to shroud yourself, to shroud your light into sounds, and then 50 parsecs later, you're complaining because you're weighed down, you become a receptacle now. You get grounded, basically. They ground your ship in gravity. This is real stuff here. So to break out of this, that's why I say it's called a breakthrough. You're breaking the prism, breaking out of prison. We've talked about this. So the first thing is that there's going to be this fear. And the reason why is because the emotional body is still activated. When a person's going through this experience, unless you already gone already, which you wouldn't even be listening to this show, there's a body that's still activated that actually feels pain, gets hurt, gets scared. And those three generally become the first stumbling blocks of having a breakthrough, a real breakthrough. We're talking superhuman.
Right, that fight or flight response kicks in, and then exactly. that's the point of no return. Either you're going to choose forward or backwards. We'll be right back with Sevan Bomar. Speaking of the fight or flight response, I'm reading out of this book, Manifesting Minds. It is interesting to note the similarities between the recollection of athletic feats while in this psycholytic state and descriptions that professional athletes give of being in the zone, a mythical heightened state of neo-perfection in which athletes report very psychedelic effects such as time slowing down and extraordinary feats of instantaneous non-thinking coordination. Athletes and normal individuals also claim the same effects in moments of heightened adrenaline, the classic fight or flight response. They've also found that if you can get past that initial fight or flight response, that scared, I don't know if I'm ready for this kind of feeling when you're using magic mushrooms or ayahuasca, or as we like to call it, geohuasca, and as you, Sevan, aptly named geohuasca instead of ayahuasca, we appreciate that. When you take these drugs and you are able to get past the fight or flight response, it can actually repair damage that you've done to your brain from the past, caused by that same fight or flight response, anxiety being one major thing. Sevan, is this what you're talking about, the fight or flight kind of response, that adrenaline rush? Sevan, do we have you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Excuse me, I have my mute button on. But yeah, I mean, what I was saying is that, they can't even really be classified as drugs because they're really just bioethnogens. They're basically they're fuel for another body. But this fight or flight, or the breakthrough, also comes through different channels. So some people just can't break away from their religious structure, and that is affecting them more than meat or even demons could. You see, and it tends to what they're really doing with just remaining stagnant. See, we're encouraged, just like the Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about, is that there's always change. And we're encouraged to get familiar with this change and to start to basically bring the change about. Okay. So this is like the difference between, like we talked about last show, either being a zodiac where, it's always, you're into certain traits and you have a certain specific frequency and that's your whole profile, or becoming a cosmos. So, the breakthrough is actually to smash through these dimensions or demented states, because the dimension happens in refraction. That means that once the light, the original cause of things, the source, which we're going to talk about here in a moment, once that goes through one refractor, which is a receptacle, it's actually the moon. That's why the light bounces off of these celestial objects. Then, as you'll see in many of in the society of the Enlightenment era images, you'll see that there's a heavy playing around with bouncing lights as a part of the cosmos, and to getting people to think that they see or experience something that is not fully what it is. And this is where the paradox comes in. It is, but it isn't. You see what I mean? So somebody just trying to, just determine, is it this or is it not? That kind of person doesn't handle this kind of information at all, because it's both. And because they want some kind of firm one pole or the other, and they're not aware of the neutral. You see what I mean? They're working with the duality. They're working with the two bottom parts of the pyramid. They're not aware of that center point that leads completely through. And then that's the breakthrough. That's the prism break, is to get to that top point. And you can see, like, you start boiling off a lot of stuff. You not only boil off the duality, you boil off people in duality, you boil off frequencies, you boil off all of that. But that hurts. That's why on the top of the pyramid, there's a sun, or that's an eyeball. They show with the rays coming. That's a sun, because you're getting closer to the source. But this having to let go of so many things burns. Some people turn back. And this is very synonymous. See, we're on the third rock now. I'm not too far away then. That's how I look at it. They said, this is the third rock from the sun. That means that there's two more and I'll be there. And I make those journeys now. So in our consciousness as being on earth is actually saying we're so close to figuring out the real meaning to this. And esoterically, if we just use the archetypical program that has been set in place, but encoded and always used in all these societies, what it says is Venus comes next. We already know that's the concave pentagram that forms most fleshly bodies. Mercury comes next. That's the theory, and all mind, just all brain left. And then finally at the sun, or the soul of the matter, the actual source of the matter, before you go through it. So that's just A, B, C, quick start map, and not getting too deep into, who we're going to sit down and worship or talk about or whatever. But as this goes on, we still need to remember, though, that same sound, that same smell, that same shape, that same color, that became such an attracting force for your unidentified vessel to take on the cloak if you ask anybody right now, do you like attractive? Are you like being attractive? They're gonna, I love attraction. So they see it as a good thing. That's the paradox. That's the mirror that Chris was talking about earlier. Well, it looks like, maybe I'm looking on the side of the mirror. Yeah, it's the other side of the mirror to where things that would normally not be something that you like and get into actually be something that you like and get into. It's a simple change. Sometimes people don't even realize that it's happening and going on because they're not familiar with the neutral. So as we go on, what we start to see is that there's this connection then with things that we supposedly say that we like and things that we don't like. And that's the first chip in the armor and the chip on the scale of this thing. Because once you start doing that, now you're fusing the two poles together. You're actually accomplishing what's called the divine marriage. But let's rewind here for a little bit. Because what you have to ask yourself is not only what you're attracted to, but also what was told to me was by my higher self or, whoever was just in the presence that night to transmit the message. Why would you even wait? Why would you even wait until you have some kind of breakthrough? What's wrong with you? Why would you get to a point that you can't repair something? Look at the word repair. Put the two back together. Why would you get to a point where you couldn't do that? You would want them dying in your arms? Man, you're a maniac. You need to get back and get another breakthrough. And that's how I work with myself. So the last thing was reverse engineer it. Turn back on logic, because see, logic is none of this stuff is good or bad. You just need to know what vehicle to use to fly through certain things. And if you're using your emotional vehicle to fly through a field that you should be using your logic, watch out. So when you reverse engineer this entire structure, you get a dramatic story about a dying God. And some people are like, what are you even talking about? Well, we're talking about, the reason why they're sending the message out that they're seeing this city in the sky, that's another parallel. It's for a reason.
One or the other. Just a few months ago, there was a city that popped up in the middle of a lake. Another one popped up in another area. And just recently, a few days ago, a city in the clouds was filmed in China. Now, it only lasted for a couple of minutes. It couldn't have been a mirage because there were no other buildings around. The other ones that appeared over the water could have very well been mirages of something that was actually physically there, just several miles away. But at this particular city just stuck out, and it makes you wonder, is it Project Bluebeam? Is it the dimensions overlapping one another? Or is it just that we're starting to wake up and we're starting to see things that have always been there, but they've been just outside of our frequency range? But because our frequency is changing, now we're starting to experience what was once called paranormal activity. Seven, what do you make of these buildings in China that appeared in the clouds?
It's symbolic. It's like, to me, I don't care if it was there or not, because if a lot of people start believing in it, then it's there somewhere. And that's how this whole thing works. It's all wet work. Once people start to concentrate on something, it actually it exists, even if it's just for a moment, and it can be tapped into. And what that originates from is that concept of as above, so below. They say, as done on heaven, as done in heaven, also on earth. You see, so there's just another way of actually creating something without having to actually build it physically. You can build it in others' minds. Okay. And so what happens with this is that where all this comes from, okay, because we're at the end of time now. And it's not the end of the time like the doomsday revelations. It's at the end of the point that we even consider time as a factor. And that's how gravity gets canceled. So does ideas of space. And that's why, we see all this darkness, but what happens when everything comes together? So I'll tell you right now that the ones that are clinging to this, they're clinging to this as if it's the last that they have. what CERN is really doing, and I didn't talk about this last show because just so many people were drilling on it, they didn't get it. So I just kind of sit back and see who's going to get it, because if somebody gets it, that means I know that they're tapped in. But the final thing that everyone missed out was when you release dark matter. See, that's what they're doing. They're releasing dark matter into the realm. This is like putting an exhaust pipe into someone's window. If they're not the kind of being that knows how to be able to deal with that kind of energy, because what dark matter is it's energy that it's in desperate need of being recycled. So those who can turn negative into positive, they actually deal with dark matter. And these are the most powerful, if you want to just put it on that kind of scale. It's like those who can turn negative to positive, they're the most powerful, because they can take a horrible situation and then turn it into roses. So that's what we're talking about as far as converters and beings that actually consume energy. See, our bacteria, they do that already. That's the frequency of what we're talking about. You can identify that it exists because you have millions of organisms that actually do that. So what we're talking about, though, is that at the end of Ouroboros' tail, which is that old serpent, Juggernaut, what they're talking about is a being in specific that we can't even really isolate ourselves from, because all is self. So it's just best to understand the story, because if you don't understand the story and the tale, you can't get out of the maze. You need to actually go through. And remember, we're talking about hyperdimensional being here. Go through it. That's why I say, hey, man, you need to have a breakthrough. You need to get through it. Because if you don't get through it, then you'll never know your true origin. You'll never actually have the most backed up, meaning the core of the files, the source. You won't have that source file. Now, this source is every bit of a sorcerer. Because at the height of externalism, see, that's Ouroboros' tail. There were spaceships, there was time travel, there was self-replication, there was genetic manipulation and cloning, there was downloading, uploading, and reloading. You see, everything that we're speeding towards now, right? Think about those laboratories in Germany. Just be the fly on the wall, look in the room, see kind of equipment that they're using. They're not just searching for telomeres and how to regenerate telomeres. This is about time travel. This is the big game. While most people are still sitting back, bickering amongst themselves, completely routed, not thinking, functioning on fuzzy logic, stuff that's not even real. There's the end of the tale or the story actually taking place right now of the dying God. Now, why do I call it a dying God? Because the word die comes from the word deuce. The word deuce or die means two, as in two die or two dice. So those dice, those two squares, okay, are what's known as the divided God. This is Deus Pater. This is in the Vatican, in the center of the labyrinth, lies the Minotaur. That's Deus, the horn god, the king. He's dead, though. That's why I said the king, he's dead. It's because he's divided. It's the last backup of the sentient being that was here that found itself inside of this receptacle that when you say we're the children of, because I'm not trying to get people to associate themselves with something, I'm telling you it owns the bodies. It was the Lord of the flesh. And on top of that, it's not a man either. For some who are trying to blame and say, oh, I knew it, the man. It's not a man. It's more like an androgen. So the reason why it's important to know this story is because in the image, these bodies were made. That's why it says, I created man in my image, meaning my backup. This is computers here we're talking about, basically. When you image a file, you take the entire log, right? You take all of the data and you put it somewhere else. That's called an image. So the image, which is our minds, that's why I said we gave them our minds. The image was our brains. That brain is the labyrinth. That's why when you think your thoughts travel down. Look at the science. Look at all this stuff. They'll tell you your thought travels down those corridors like a spark. And if it has enough of the spark stuff to travel into the deep recesses of the mind, aka the subconscious, it's able to wake up all sorts of things. But, and there's a big but to that, if you're going down corridors that don't lead to ways out, that's why in the ancient times, they actually had the diagram of the maze, which was the corridors of the brain. And when you walk through the maze physically, it also corresponded you walking through it on the mental level, because the men, if you see the Egyptian god with the long phallus, the men was the creator of the physical worlds. See, now we know we already come from something greater, in a sense, if you want to play that game with yourself, something greater, because we were in the non-physical, we were non-ID'd. But you need to realize that architect that they keep talking about was and has given the image of its creation, basically everything that it learned through spaceships, time travel, self-replication, cloning, downloading and uploading, which is what those pyramids are about. Because when you really understand this whole thing and you just start sitting back and you just observe the world, not from everything that you've read, but what you know, you'll start coming to these conclusions.
Sevan Bomar was talking about the corpus callosum earlier. The corpus callosum is actually a nerve fiber bundle that connects the left and right hemispheres of the cerebral cortex. It's basically the original brain-to-brain communication device. It's what allows the two hemispheres of the brain to talk to each other. And they've actually found that abnormalities in this one area of the brain is responsible for most of the people that have schizophrenia. And I think that a lot of us have a sort of schizophrenia already, because it seems like a lot of us are very much tied into one part of the brain or the other, one hemisphere of the brain or the other. And we're completely immovable until we do psychedelics in some capacity and have a spiritual experience that allows us to combine and repair, like he said, the two hemispheres of the brain and bind them back together. Sevan, is this what you were discussing earlier?
Yes, excuse me. It's all energetics. It's so simple and intense too that if a person doesn't have that ability to transmit a signal over that bridge, then the other side of the brain just never receives it. They actually have a documentary about it. I think it's called Left Out. But it's basically how the left side of the brain is almost virtually isolated, not only from society, but also from communication in a person's consciousness. And that's why, of course, that's generally the side of the brain that's also, both sides of the brain need to be actually connected and balanced. But what also happens with this corpus callosum is in duality, that's how it gets burned out. That continuously having dual or conflictive ideas burns the corridor, just like a wire that keeps getting crossed over and over, or if there's too much current still trying to travel down that passageway until the point that it just fries the passageway. And then now it needs to be reinvigorated. And this is why you now need what would be a real light worker to go in and work with fibers. Like you could see the fibers when you're in the other body. This is why they were able to see the DNA, and they were able to see all of that stuff in that particular body, because then you can do the repairs, because you're just not there to, wow, this looks amazing. There's actually things that you can do in there. And, and this, like I said, this is the end of this whole imprisonment with time and gravity. And that's why, but in the end, this is like, it's a die hard. You see what this thing is like, the part of us. Okay, because I don't want to isolate it as something separate. It's the part of us that fears the change. This is what we're dealing with. It's embodying that. And then rather than people face that center of the Minotaur, or the Minotaur in the center of the labyrinth, they just as soon stay on the outskirts, walk down these paths that don't go anywhere except for to another wall. Sometimes there's a trap door there. You see, this is important, that when you're going through the maze, going through your mind, there are perils. You could actually go down one corridor and we never see you again. The person can completely get stuck on a path, think that that path is what's going to take them to whatever they think the next level or whatever kind of concept they're stuck with. So the thing is remember that the reason why, because that's the source of the creation of the physical world, is that the dividing or dying God was backing itself up on the physical plane, meaning this is when this idea comes about, and you can see how it happens. When we start to think about, well, all the stuff that we learned, where are we going to keep it? Because if we're going to go back to where we came from before, should all this be lost? So I'm sure there was a whole council meeting about this. And obviously the decision was the physical bodies would be created. Because through the physical bodies, you can always tap through the DNA the entire story. You can tap all the information. You can tap time travel. That's what all these spirals and all this geometry ends up leading into. You tap all the major aspects of the actual framework, cloning, all that is all connected into the spirals in the DNA. Trees, how trees grow, knowledge from trees, all of this stuff is spirals. You see, so you just basically learn the spiral force. But also, this is the fire of Prometheus, by the way. So, and this is the hammer of Thor. So if you pick it up or you touch it and you don't have the ability to balance out, it will destroy you rather fast. It will corrupt you. Corruption is like corrosion. It basically fries out all of your rationality. You see what I mean? So this is why it's sacred, as they say. You're sacred. To be able to reach inside of the holiest of holies of your own temple is real work. It's not a game. It's not something that you just sit around and I'm going to go and, I'm going to sin today. Good luck with that attitude. So that's, of course, why we're pushed further. We're Plutonian as a society, kept completely away from the idea that there's a source. And distracted with sports and games and all these fictitious things, but few people are actually really going in. Because some people say, well, where'd you get all this information? I went in. You go in long enough, eventually that stuff is so complex. So that's why I was saying the macrobes, the keyholes, the portals, all that stuff is conscious. It's not just there. It's got its own consciousness and frequency to it. And then when you look at it, you're like, wow, there's nothing in our language that actually can describe what I'm looking at. So there's going to be actually no way to transmit back to everyone what exactly I'm looking at here. Not to mention, this thing is utterly blowing my mind. I mean, literally, I can't put it in my framework. So then you're tested to leave your skin suit or to cling to it because you're about to die. That's what you feel like, oh my goodness, I'm about to die. I've gone too far. And a lot of people know what I'm talking about. It's like, oh my goodness, I hope I come back. Salivia can even do that kind of thing, or Salvia. But listen to what I'm saying here. The reason, because this is specific. That's why we don't have to get into any of the small gods. We don't have to get into any of the small little stories, because we should just skip the bad guys and go right to the leader. The bad guy can probably be rehabilitated. We need to go to the source of this. And so that's why when people start getting close to it, the shit starts happening. Excuse my language. It's like you're facing so much turbulence because all the people who are out there on Pluto, they don't feel anything. And they're even, they even come by in their long orbit. Every now and then they come by you with that whole Plutonian idea that basically we can all sit here forever, ever. And that, basically based on what they're doing and what they're talking about, there's no way we're getting to the source. Right. So you fly by some of them and then you're like, man, why are they not feeling what I feel like? Last month, the world may not have ended, or my world ended. Like everything about what I believe is going on as far as the facts and how things are tightened down has changed. After September, old ideas died. And ironically, this month I'll be, on the 22nd, I'll be 37. So this gets me to a point to where it's like, yo, hey, buddy, this is real deal. You already know it's real deal. You now have to go for the whole thing now. You got to get to the next level. and you have to cancel time. So here's how we're going to do it. You need to go through the image. You need to cancel out this image, this mirror, this mirage. See, this is why we were using this word today, or you use this word, the mirage. Because the root of this word is actually marriage. Because it's an illusion. No person belongs to another person. See, the moment that mirage starts happening, that's the root of the biggest issue we're having here on the planet. Once you say this one belongs to me, it means that it can't be someone else's. And that's not what the merge is about.
Very well said. We're going to pick it up in hour number 3.
Conclusion. I mean, I just wanted to say this because that's why they call it demerge, meaning to take away the merging. Like, oh no, I'm going to cause chaos.
Let's get into that in just a few moments. This is the Truth Frequency. We have Sevan Bomar on uninterrupted for the next hour. So, Sevan, feel free to take us away. Pilot this ship anywhere you'd like to go.
For sure, because, we're already in... So the thing is that everyone needs to understand that the reason why we're at this point is because once we get to this end, you can actually see through to the beginning. See, just like if you could visualize it, if you're at the tip of the tail and there's only just that film that's in between the beginning and the end, you can see through that film. This is like synonymous with seeing through the mirror. And all this is exact. Like when you get 15 years later, maybe this will be common conversations between people. Now, whether they'll say that I was one of the first people that ever talked about it, we'll see. But the reality is that this is not something that I'm basing on theories. This is when you understand how to use your abilities. There is really only one core thing that's going on here. And it's so symbolic. It's in every single thing. Even when you look under the microscope, you see it. But again, because it could get refracted, meaning bounced off of something, and then that light is distorted, then someone looking at that can maybe at times not interpret what's really happening and what's really going on. So that's why if you can see both sides. So before we took the break, we talked about the demerge being actually instrumental in removing the merger, like removing us coming together. Okay. But remember, because there's two sides of it, the demerge also is very useful for taking away the illusion. Like when some crazy stuff happens, we start sobering up. Maybe this is not where I want to really be unless we're going to really work as a collective, and these folks are not going to be slaving us because it's like 1%. Maybe this is not where I really, maybe I don't need to be as like in my situation, I'm talking about specifically, not watching over every single thing, even all of these websites and all their updatings and all that stuff on a consistent basis, because if someone hacks the site and takes the mail server, then it's going to cause issues with people even getting notifications that they've been accepted to the site. You see what I mean? So what I'm saying is something that seems dark. This person hacked me, just like we were saying earlier today, becomes great for removing the illusion that we don't need to protect ourselves. You see what I mean? Or at least set up the defense, right? So this is why they say it's a forked tongue, meaning that it actually has two sides. One side sounds pleasing, and then the other side sounds what am I looking for? The word that you basically, I don't even know the other bad word anymore, but it sounds displeasing. Okay. We'll just put it like that. We'll put a D in front of it, because anytime you put a D in front of something or a half of a circle, it takes away from it. So this is what the word pairing. If you have two Ds, you put them together and you create a complete circle. That's 3D. The reason why it becomes 3D is the merging of those two Ds creates something else, another dimension, another aspect, or a way to look at things. And then now once you have that new aspect of looking at things, now you're on the top, you're in the center. So you can look easily at Cain and Abel, black and white, God and the devil, and all the other dualistic forces, but they will have no power over you. And this is, so if you get into the duality, if you buy into the whole thing, then you're only giving fuel to the forces that feed on that. And they need that. They need to suckle from you. And the reason why they have to do that or try that is because they are still trying to identify with the reality. So let's get into this a little bit deeper. So the receptacle, then, the moon, right? The reason why it was synonymous with the Kaaba, and if you understand the story of the Kaaba, it said it became black because of the world's sins. Now, it just so happens that the word sin actually was a reference to the moon. And it's because of all of, you see how they're dancing around it, but nobody's actually said, what are we talking about? Let's stop talking about the childhood games here and get right to it. Well, it's the memories of the world. It's all the world's memory. It's its backup. And it's dark. It's not pure light. It's not fresh. It's not non-ID'd. It's opposite. It's got all of the energies and the essence and all that of everything that's happening. It's not even discriminating of what it's logging. It's logging everything. And that's why they always come to the thing, well, God knows everything. It's because those people who are saying that worship the moon, whether they realize it or not. They're worshiping the past, man. So it said, behold, like when I come to these other people, they were worshiping the stars. Well, the story of this segment is when we came to these people, they were worshiping the past. And they couldn't see that, as silly as some of the concepts were. I was talking about this to a good friend of mine today, son, about how when they were putting the alabaster into the walls or the asbestos, they didn't know it was going to cause cancer. They thought it was going to insulate the wall so people don't get cold during the winter. This is how I look at some of the old dogmatic traditions. They were just coming up with concepts to try to explain something that they didn't have the sight to see yet. And now what we do is we just accredit them to actually knowing and then fall into the same pit that they were in too. If nobody made it out, if you don't got real live beings that have been on this dimension before, clearly and directly, not shrouded and in secret, coming right to us and explaining to us, my child, here is what you need to do next to get yourself out of this. That means that nobody made it out. So where we're at this point now is that we, for ourselves, need to do it, because that's what the thing is. It's not about nobody getting you out. It's even not about what you've been through. It's actually, can you get through it? Can we fly through the image and face it? See, and that's when it gets real again, right? Because see, everyone's fake in certain tenses until they're illusionary if they're not going to face go through the image. Not what's in the mirror. So let's talk about this, because this could be very confusing. So we're going to simplify it. What you see in the mirror is already been refracted several times by the light continuously being stepped down. So what's left is this character that we're looking at in the mirror. So when somebody says know thee, meaning you need to know thyself, if we confuse that with the character in the mirror, surely we're lost. This is like Narcissus looking into the reflection and then falling in love with itself. And then each little variation of the reflection, it continuously imagines that that's it. Know thyself truly in the physical plane means know the architect and fly through the architect to get out of the labyrinth, because only one knows the way out, the one who built it. And because the one who built it has set up all of this cherubims and all this different ideas of what it really is, like the fucking Wizard of Oz, excuse my language. It's so scary. Like I'm looking at a thread on my page because I put something up there. I'm a jealous God. And then I put the scripture and I said, this is the first sign and when you know that you're in a bad spiritual relationship, because nobody or nothing should have a pass with you to be able to act a certain way. And just because of its title that you allow it to do that. Because that's where we get presidents from. That's where we get all these other people that come with these titles. And all of a sudden they're entitled to take your children away. They're entitled to give you a religion. They're entitled to do all that because we entitle them. So one person says, oh, I would never confront them that openly. You see the fear, right? Because it lives and it eats on the fear. And that's why we know that we would encounter fear. It's like when you're walking into something, if this thing has been eating it, it's going to reek of it. This is like old school Argonaut action here. We're walking in and it's like bats and it stinks. But we know that where we're going is going to get us the fleece. And this is getting to a point where the dimension is saturated with cowards, not people who are going to fight wars and kill each other. That's not going to show bravery and courage. We're talking about those who would knock down the door of the Diaboli itself if it means it's coming after your children. And then some people say, but, I don't know how you could even come to the conclusion it's coming after our children. It's time. Time is coming for us. It's coming for those you love. So if you don't break time, if you don't wake up, Titan, then, this is going to look like something totally different. And it's going to keep going. It's going to grind us it's the millstone or the grain. Which one are you going to be? And last month for me, man, it was tough. Like I tried to repel it as much as possible because I already know the play. You put the thoughts and the ideas of the negativity into the most conscious people's mind. These are the precogs. They actually basically move the cogs of time before they move physically. This is what's happened. This is what the New Age movement was about. Like if you really research it, good friend of mine, Sonny, sent me the last final documents on how they basically stole Paschal Bishop Randolph's his whole spiritual work and then created something dark from it. And that became the OTO and the Golden Dawn. So all of this is what's been culminating is just to use the mind of the most conscious people to create a greater level of destruction, i.e. split atom. Once atom split, you see what happens when we split them on the dimension, right? Like with splitting the atom, like we know what that causes. So what does that cause spiritually? If you sever a person from their soul, which is what we're dealing with right now, people are being severed from their soul. And then when they don't have a soul anymore, this is all basic stuff. How does a person carry on that has a soul? Soulless. It kills people. It does everything. It just goes and gets a beer after. The soul is gone. You split atom. Now he doesn't have a consciousness. Or it doesn't have a consciousness. So this is the game. This is hardball. And that's why we know we're at the end of time, because it's like watching something scrape with its nails, while you're dragging it. That's how much it's holding on to our lives. So that's why I said this is a depth conversation today, because time is coming after our children. So we have to finish time off. And the only way to do that is to close the loop, meaning connect the beginning with the end and cancel out time. So we've identified what this is about. This is about the past, something trying to keep old memories that should just be let go. Now, some people think that these memories are like just the manifestations of their thoughts. We're old memories. Everyone here is dead. And that may be hard to take, but wait until you see what real life is. Like, we just need to think about it. If we're stepped down several times and now we're mini men, we're basically micros. What is it like when we get back to the stage of macro? Right? And then how much power and essence and connection and energy and how much do you really have? Now, obviously, in some of the substances that are still bridges to those worlds, you get a glimpse of it for that moment, not just to visually, but they bolt you right in. It's full on immersion, right? But you get that, whoa, this is expanded. So because of that, you still have to do your math. If we're on this energetic potential, we can't even really come out the bodies at will. But then you happen to activate that. The jump in the frequency would basically, if you put it on a scale, that would be living, this will be dead. So that's why I mean that this is the world of the dead created by a dying God. Because everyone here that keeps dividing themselves from the truth will perish. Eventually, your light will refract so many times, you will be non-existent. No one will be able to see you or recognize you. That's why we have people right now that they're all at the train stations at Germany. They're everywhere. People don't care. These same people collecting even the big ones, like, even some of the people that you may know, they collecting all this cash. They ain't lifted a finger. We're sitting at night and day in Fringe, still cracking this code to refreshment. How can we renew ourselves and for good? Because someone's got to go through. And that's why I went through. See, that night I went through. I no longer consider death as having any hold on me. And I experienced the complete death process. And that's when I saw it all. I saw the whole structure. And I saw all the suffering. And then I said, you know what? In these lunar-based realities, these receptacles of memories of the past, there's so much sorrow because they lack self-ascension. See, everyone is looking at another person, depending on the other person for their happiness. Their ascension, that's happiness. They run synonymous. And because of that, it's just a strict rule in the cosmos. It doesn't work that way. You must first become it. That way, and then when you become it, you would have had known everything. You would have had seen the embodiments of the frequencies of darkness. You would have known what you escaped to never return to. You wouldn't have to look back and say, well, maybe I missed something. Did we go down the wrong corridor? Is this, what room are we in the maze? See, that's the only way we're going to go forward is when you solve it. Solve it coagula, meaning find the solution to it. Go to the soul of it. So the soul of this world, which is something that, again, now imagine this is a conversation, okay? But what happens when you got to go see the soul of the world for real? And then what happens when you find out that it's in the image of you? Now you know yourself and the loop is closed. At that point, you faced darkness and you lived. You seen its face and you lived. So that's what this is about. And it's a serious thing. So just remember, the moon is a receptacle. It holds memories. Everything that's underneath the moon will always be affected by the essences and urges and pangs of the moon. The emotions are like waves. Okay, I had a wave of emotion come over me. It controls the waves in the ocean. The moon does. Those waves are frequencies. It's so many frequencies. When you sit out at the ocean and you turn on the third eye and you just look, you just see all of the people. And you see all of these beings and you just see them all just floating there on the water because that's their memories. All of their memories are stored right there in the salt works. Right? So again, you go through long enough, eventually you say, hey, what happens if I do this right in front of the ocean? Let me see what I see. When you have a third eye, you can see it when you get to the realm of truth. Then those memories as being frequencies, see, they become so heavy. See, we see them as superfluous, but we don't realize that these are the most heaviest things. These memories, they're so hard to dump off. They weigh you down. And that's why the planet is so heavy. Some people say, well, Sirius is the heaviest. We may be on Sirius. We don't even understand where the hell we are most of the time. This planet is heavy. And when you fly by it, remember, heavy, fat, dense objects have the most gravitational pull. Because for a being that still doesn't have an ID, it doesn't realize that you don't want an ID, they have to end up flying into this in order to realize the process of how to get back out the maze. So this is the thing. Death is only a gateway to the life. And the thing is because incarnation is all part of the lower mind. It's like when you get into fear and you get into scarcity, spaceships, cloning, all these different things, at a certain point, you have this thought that you're going to lose all of it. And then so you back it up. That's the lower mind. The lower mind, or some call it the subconscious mind, is the backup drive. That's why when you go into the subconscious, it's like, have you ever read any of these stories about subconscious? I mean, it gets pretty dark in people's subconscious mind, because this is also the fertile ground for the dream, where we can basically put a movie together every night. And then many of those movies are definitely not movies that you want to watch, let alone be in. But here you are in your subconscious mind, traveling through the corridors. So the conclusion of this is that all of what I'm talking about today is no different than what we do when we bring children to life. That's what I mean by finding the image, flying through the image, conquering your fears, canceling out time, which is the image. The image is time. So the conclusion of this, again, I said that twice, but in the dream world, we do make a movie every night. Different characters, scenes, etc. Most don't have control of those because that's not their design. They're children of the designer. That's how they inherited it. And that's the same thing that we do to our children. Our children, when we birth them, they inherit some of our design, right? Even he talks like him, he looks like him. And they even say, well, if you go back to when you go back and you study your parents, you say, oh, no wonder why he does that. I see why he does that. His mom does that. But the truth is that this has been happening so many times, you got to go back all the way to the point where the original image is there. And then you see that image and then you fly through it. So, and then also just to remember that when you close the loop, as I told you today, I proved that attraction can be benevolent in our world, but be malevolent to our higher state of consciousness. So this is a simple formula for allowing us to cancel out all the positive and negative, meaning you don't even have to think about it. You don't have to put it into your consciousness, especially when you're making your journey. Because remember, I'm not talking about when the ship's parked and you're watching what's on the dashboard. I'm talking about when you choose to take off and you're trying to get through certain fields. If you fill your mind with the emotion and then it starts to activate the fear, you need to immediately hit the button that gasses it out with the sorrow of having to deal with burying people here. And if nobody ever figures this out, and how much more memories of hurt and pain. You see? So the big breakthrough, whoever pops the envelope, is going to be, and it is several people at one time. I don't care. One person, 1,000 people, I'm not going to argue with you. 1,000,000 people, I'm not going to argue with you. But whoever has got to do it, just take the responsibility for yourself. Because that's what I did. And the only thing that I'm doing now is I'm doing my best to transmit what I know, but in such an inadequate way because it's language. And this is, to tell you the truth, in September is where I felt powerless. Because I saw that the words, they could not convey necessarily the essence of how serious this was. Only those nights alone and deep thought, when everything quiets down and you finally turn it off for a moment. Because if you notice, like we're so rattled in this reality. It's like things are moving so fast and there's so many things to do. It's like, by the time you get into bed, you're already sleepy again for it to all go on again. But when we sit in our stillness for a moment and we say, you know what? What's happening here, man? Has somebody put a frequency out there that just makes us forget that we still are on the time clock here? And if we've already cracked into hyperdimensional travel through our internal organic vessel, that we should make as many trips as possible to end up finally cracking through it and then figure out a way to design, create, form, fashion, or invent something to look out for those who cannot find their way? Shall we not leave like they lead the mice through the maze, cheese in different places, to allow people to start to logically come to the conclusion that this is being in time is not something that we should just take so lightly, because if we're in time, that means we're heavy. Adapting too many of these concepts and ideas and then not even being able to break free. That's why that tarot card that shows the devil, the human and the male and the female are chained down to it, because it's the memories of that crap. And who promotes that all the time? We see in the biblical traditions and all these religious traditions, they just promote this malevolent character so that by the time you finally wise up that you need to start using your own abilities, you make this thing, like I said, the Wizard of Oz, so big and so fearful that you can't even overcome it. Because it's a real thing. It'll pop up somewhere because it's in the subconscious mind. And that's why, again, anyone who has the fear, and you can work on fear, it's a consistent thing, but anyone who has it can't break through. Because listen, there's a fear of us all being together. Now you think about it, like this same fear, and look how it all just connects. This same fear is what these Illuminatis, if you want to use that term, and all these people are experiencing. Because they know, well, once we all get together once, and they just put themselves on the opposite side, if they all come together, then we're going to be done. So, but that same frequency is also present in those who really attempt to make the journey, and then they're asked to merge. Like, yo, drop your baggage. No one here is worshiping another. No one here is greater than another. It's a whole nother thing. In fact, I'm not even talking to you in English right now. Like, come back later. Like, it'll always be here. Don't worry. Eventually you'll get to it, but you're not in the condition to be getting at it now. So you need to pass these courses. Like, this is the whole thing about this universe or this university, at least in my world, because I have to live somewhere real. I die in places that are fake. And that's what happens. That's how we can split atom, is in the falsehood. Then, you die after a while, really. You lose all your essence and all your energy. We watch it happen to our parents. We've seen it happen to our grandparents. There's only, a small percentage that don't become affected by the overall weathering of this wheel. So I don't see purpose in it anymore. So we now have adapted this abusive mentality to where we accept it. Oh, well, we must have asked to be here. Well, look, if I asked, I need to see where I asked. You see, you got to just get direct and start demanding. If I said that, then I need to see that. Show me the contract where I signed. It's that vivid. If you got something, show it to me. Oh, you can't show it to me? That means you don't got nothing. That's all a misperception then. So let's make our way to the source. And the source that I identified it tonight, it's like flying into the sun. It's fearsome. It's terrible. It's like a lion or something just roaring until you realize it ain't got no teeth. Because that is the aspect of it. That's its archetypical form. And so we go through it. And that's it. That's all I really have to say today. I'm spending as much time and as much energy as I can for everyone to do this. We've made massive breakthroughs. But because, to real talk, it's hard to get help doing this because people need help. So a lot of times they come to you and they say, oh, yeah, I can help. I'm coming to help. I want to do something. And then you find they're on the phone with you, for 10 hours trying to tell you about their story. And they don't really know how to do what they really said they can do. And, you face all of that in this. So people say, well, what's the big holdup already? Us. Everyone's got it. I've met millionaires now, people who 300-400 million that are not even tied into the framework of this whole, the darker side, if you may, of the dimension, but they're into this whole fairy side of it. Oh, I've always been blessed to be this successful, and that's mainly because I'm a good person. And I'm just looking did you make it past the first vault yet? You see, so it's happening to everyone, like the dark person sitting in the corner, and then this light being, quote unquote, supposed fairy that has all the ability to do it, but still acting like it's already been done. It can happen to anyone. It happens to the best of us. This maze, that corn, the children of the corn. If we don't meet the architect and fly through the architect, that's the only one who knows the way out. If something builds something, we need to extract what it knows to find the way out. It embodies that. It's symbolic. So that's why when I look at now all this for 6 years now for me, I see now I have all of the symbolism. I have all of the books. I have more than enough. But then it leads all the way back to something simple. You are the Lord and the God and the creator of your life. And once you start reaching into that again, you can do these things in greater, basically. It's like just getting back into your body and saying, you know what? Today, this is the end. See, you can do that at any moment. See, that's why they say the moment is so powerful, because at some point, you see, they try to say that, oh, well, this is where the past becomes dangerous. Well, you said you were going to change last time. You did kind of change, but you're back to the same thing over again. See, this is how the past functions as a weight to hold you down. But the power is in the moment, because you could just be like, I'm breaking through. Done. I've heard enough. Even if I don't even believe anything that he's actually saying, I'm still going to make a breakthrough, because that's just something that I want to do. You see, like if there's a taste of something here that's greater, and I'm telling you, like, I've been to the point where it's clearly a whole nother level to our existence. Then it's like George Carlin said, there's a party going on and you're not invited, meaning that there's something going on. And I'm not even saying just the side of the societies. I'm talking about that there's other worlds, and then there's beyond the worlds. And in those spaces, there's so much connection. I mean, the feeling and the ability that you obtain is because it's like returning home. And the only reason why we can't stay is most of the times because we want to come back here. And by all means, until we can at least establish, because this is a real thing, it's a real work. Nobody else is responsible. We're making ourselves responsible. So until there's a ferry between our plane and the greater planes of existence, our work must go on. We must build the bridge. And that's real work. That's the real craftsman. You see, so there is an essence, as I say, in everything. Never look at anything or anyone, any frequency, and think it only has one side on the dualistic plane. It always has two. And it's up to you as being the neutral component, the one on the top, in the center, to balance it out. See, balancing is also to do with the checkbook, and it's also to do with your energy and your current and your currency. So if you can't balance it out, basically this happened to me. You see how we balance the situation out? I got hacked. Chris, he got DDoS. You balanced it out by, I did need to type my stuff up. Thanks. Balanced. Not, oh, they're coming to get me. I knew that the moment that I start saying the wrong, I mean, come on already with it, because you can't run your system that way. And this is what we learn in doing this, right? So all this night and day, like people, they're still working on themselves. They don't know what it's like to set up a station, literally a station, to where you're working on others. This is like a Pep Boys in the middle of downtown. I mean, there's people coming in, cars coming in. They tried to rob the place yesterday. It's all sorts of stuff going on. And then all because one agreed to assist, right? So this is why I don't have any withdrawals or any kind of feeling like, everything that I'm saying, everything I'm doing is not meaningful and doesn't have an extreme purpose. And I need to desist because I already understand what kind of work this is. This is Mount Meru, baby. We climb up. This is not slip and slide and wet and wild at raging rivers where we're going to slide down and we're going to giggle. But I bet you when I get to the top, I'll be strong. And I'm willing to work for it. See, they say you can have anything you want as long as you're willing to work for it. So in that case, then let us begin our climb. And that's what this is about. It's about, even if, like I said, up there, there's some kind of mini boss up there that needs to be dealt with, so be it. Anything that I need to face. And that's what it is. So we say to ourselves as a mantra, anything that I need to face to find self, to find myself again. See, I can't be confused that this is me. See, that's where the first part of the recovery starts. It's like AA. You need to admit you got a problem. If you're subscribing to the person that's in the mirror, you're still in denial. If you think that's you, you're in denial. That's how it works. So until you accept that that's not you, you can't see who you really are. And then again, because we're everything, at least that happened on the physical dimension, there's going to be some stuff that could be hard to swallow, but we must face it. Because it's not going to be just all good. That's the person who just wants to deal with one pole. And it's not going to just be all bad, like the sorcerer over there and with the weird books that cost a lot of money putting spells on everybody. Like, it's not just going to be that either. It's going to be everything. And then when, like I said, when we can solve it, that's when we become these great beings. And I'm looking and I'm doing it now. I'm looking forward to doing it more and more to myself all the time. But it's a work in progress. Balance is not a thing you just do once. It's a consistent thing. You must work all the time to balance the scales. Every month, for anyone dealing with a system of current, even the energy in their body, they have to account for, and that's what the moon is also in charge of, that dynamic, reaping and sowing. You need to account for, where's the expenditure and all the energy? Did you spend this energy? Was it hard-earned energy that you spent wisely? Or did you just blow it? So you have to set up all of this in your mind. It's like the infrastructure of what it takes to run a cosmos. You need to understand, well, man, we're low on prana. You need to go get some prana, homie. Like, right now, you're just basically running on chicken grease, and that's only powering that body. You're going to need to push power in this body, and you're going to need to do it by this time. It's like when we get proactive about ourselves and we start seeing, this is the best time. So what's happening right now is the sun is actually going into its lowest point. So during this time, a lot of the darkies, basically, that tends to shroud the land. So somebody needs to be the light until the program that runs on the dimension stabilizes itself again. See, because they say it's a yuga. So we could be sitting in darkness for like the next 3 or 4 years unless somebody chooses to light up. Let that person be you. You see all the dynamics of how it works. We've laid it all out. The blueprint is there. Now we just need to run the trials. This is like beta, though. We don't have elders coming to us talking in an innovative way, something that we understand, with all the resources also, by the way, because you need those. Just saying, okay, look, this is what we're going to do. We're responsible for setting that up. So what does that mean? We got to build the bridge. So see, none of this stuff that I'm talking about is new age and flighty. It's none of that stuff. I'm saying there needs to be a real bridge that we build based on the knowledge of what we discover when some of us are deciding to make the jump, even if there's no catcher. Because we're risking our lives. You see, like, people don't get that. It's like, look, I'm risking my existence. I'm gambling with time. I've spent 6 years here. I can't just give all of this up. You see what I mean? It's like, it's not about me quitting. This is integrity. Like, if the integrity of this system is impenetrable, so they can hack the computers and all that stuff, they're only going to serve to create a greater problem. And if there is a they, you see what I mean? So this is positive reinforcement. This is continuously staying in the battle. This is being victorious. And then the last but not least, once you get yourself balanced out in the states of your consciousness, you will realize that others around you, just from the stage of acceleration, it doesn't mean that you're depending on them, you're pulling energy from them, but it's catchy. Meaning being around those who are inspired by finding their true selves is motivating. Like, it just motivates you to, for sure, he's talking about me. This is not about him. It's about me. And then this gives you all the reasons, because we need those reasons. Those reasons are the corpus callosum. I need to know. I need to solve this. I need to know why I went through this abuse when I was younger. I need to know why I can't go here. And I need to know why they're treating these people like this. Like, that's the solving part. But see, today is the ultimate key, because you now know that where the end connects to the beginning, you see where the attraction is one good on one aspect, but then bad on another. And then now you also see your position in the center where you need to be doing the check and balances, because that's i.e. you're the God of your own consciousness. So you must judge, meaning you must go into these energies and balance them out and put them in the right place. That's all that this stuff is meaning. We need to now adapt an esoteric definition of how we're experiencing this experience, and leave that exoteric stuff to the neophytes. If they don't know what the pentagram means by now, if they don't know who the Anunnaki are by now, if they don't know who all of these entities are at this point, just leave it. You see what I mean? Because all that stuff should have been solved. You could take one aspect of it. What is the Illuminati? The Illuminati is the false light. It's an external way that people follow in order to lead them virtually nowhere. Summed up, done, gone. Illuminati does programming and everything to do that. There's two sides to them. There's the one that's strictly technological in every single aspect, TV, all these kind of things, Disney, Phantasmagoria, etc. And then there's their other side, which is strictly spiritual. That's basically chthonic. OTO, worshiping basically fallen eidolons of degenerated consciousness like the great wild beast. Done. Illuminati solved. Next. What's next? Flat Earth? Who cares? Flat Earth should be taken as only a concept within a person's consciousness to basically remove themselves from the idea that you're in a globe or a sphere, and to raise yourself onto a disc. So that way that you can actually begin to traverse the center of the spindle, which is what you see when you lay DVD disc down. There's a center, so you can go up those ladders and make it out of the entire construct. Flat Earth solved. Next. So this is how we have to treat this stuff. We can't be like still holding grudges that these folks is doing these meetings and acting like the earth is flat or round, or, you see what I mean? So it's got to get solved at a certain point so you can get to the real deal, because that's all that stuff is. That's just all play. That's all for kids. The real deal is, can you see your own face and live? Can you face yourself? Can you tap completely into your subconscious to figure out the origins of your entire existence and stomach it? And then on top of that, can you be in the condition to come back to these people? Come back to these kids? Or are we going to lose you? You see what I mean? Like, because that's real, man. They said grown man, grown woman. This is grown man, grown woman stuff. So that's where, to me, our message is transcendent. In the beginning, we were dealing with the things that you deal with when you begin, mainly duality, and identifying all these life forms and destroying concepts of things that are ruling over us. But when I was a child, I thought like a child. Now I'm on a whole different framework. I'm not even a human in the sense of what that would be limited to. That's just an ID. That's the human ID. So, but it's a real thing. It's not one thing to say, oh, I'm not a human. I mean, that sounds catchy, especially to UFO enthusiasts. But have you made those trips? have you changed up your framework? And then, you see what I mean? This is just the difference. And that's all I'm saying. It's like, we can start spotting the difference. So I just want to say, that's why I deal with True Frequency Radio, because every time I get on here, we knock it out of the park. It was even the first shows. It was that kind of energy, and it's for a reason. Now, I do spend a lot of my time looking for the reasons, as I'm patching up the wires that were burnt out on the corpus callosum to make it all make sense for me. That's what I spend my free time in doing. So that's why everything around me has so much more meaning. And then when we see it in life, when we start tapping into that meaning, you have passion. And then as you fly closer, because you're becoming more and more real, you're becoming back to your wild state in a sense, your purest origin. But when you have to face that stuff, it takes the greatest of character. And this is actually how you get your character. Like this, you develop more and more of who you are because you're flying closer to that. You see what I mean? So it's just, we all can see this because the further you get away from it, the more you're not who you really are. We see people that are just completely taken over at this point with some idea and some program and archetype. They've tried to duplicate the same process of the person getting a heart, a liver, kidney, lungs, pancreas, all that with what goes on in the reality with somebody getting a Rolex watch, a Hugo Boss suit, a Mercedes Benz. It's the same thing. So as above, so below, truly, let us understand or understand, as I always say, the blueprint. And then let us begin to function as we do know it. And so, I'm definitely at the end of my clock. So I'm going to just answer some questions. But, I want to say thank you to everyone for being present. Obviously, I have at least a part 2 or part 3 of this because I have to put it back in and bring it back out again because, some things may not have been as clear. But as I said in the beginning, just to sum it up, you have the moons, which are simply the receptacles. They're holding all the energy, they're holding all the memories. It's a different kind of energy. Then that when it begins to hold it, it's alive. Those memories become alive. And that's what becomes the emotion. We can trigger those emotions, okay, because they're primordial. All the emotions are primordial. They come from the first cause. And in that first cause, as long as we're here and aware of our consciousness, we'll be here in the ocean. We talked about how the ocean is space. That water is something. That's why water is so mysterious. It's the byproduct of the soul. The byproduct of the souls are memories. They're waves. Just like a record is a magnetic disc. And when you vibrate that area on the disc, it reanimates. That's how you get triggered. Somebody vibrates your frequency or chord on something that's stored somewhere, and then you reenact it and you play it out like a record. Then we have these frequencies that are all these ways because not every single feeling and emotion is the same. Everyone, we can't say that crying is the same as laughing on this dimension. We're just talking about being here and experiencing this. So we have all these frequencies, right? And then those frequencies now need receptacles themselves. So that's where you get the division. It's not just one big pot. You got all these different cells, which are the receptacles. And because these cells are holding different things, they are vessels that can traverse different space because each of them are a different frequency. So one can't go into this other area, but that one can. So that's what all the different vessels and the bodies are about, so that you could have a perception of these different memories until you reach capacity. See, capacity is when you can't take it anymore. You feel like continuously collecting all of this stuff is weighing you down. So you need space. You see, that's the process of how we got here. And in that need of space, we divided ourselves. You see, we separated ourselves. That's the marriage or the mirage. So just think about it, because when you just roll it, moons, emotion, the ocean, waves, frequencies, receptacles, vessels, memory, capacity, space. You just reverse engineered the entire dying God's lifestyle across the cosmos for aeons in the height of externalism in those fat ass spaceships, working with time travel, self-replication, cloning, downloading and reloading and uploading into a string in a spiral. And then now we have it inside of us and it's changing us. It's constantly changing, constantly moving, constantly spiraling. That's why they relate it to a serpent, because it's energy. It's back and forth. Two-strand DNA. Here they are. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Internal, external, internal, external. Oh, it's, I just love attraction. Oh my goodness, I'm trapped. I hate being trapped. You see, it's like, yo, you got some issues. Anyone watching this from the dome is like, oh my goodness, this is Zombieville down there. They're just attacking attacking each other. They're eating each other.
Mm-hmm.
You see? So it's a real thing. But you see that's the Disney. It can all be made to seem just so fake and non-existent. It's like we could watch these folks trapped at the train station on Vice News, call over to a friend in Europe and say, hey, are they really at that train station? And that person said, yeah, man, it's about 1,000 of them out there. And for somehow that doesn't register to us as, hey, man, if anyone's experiencing some troubles here, we're all going to feel it. So how that finally ripples to me may just be my site getting hacked, but I'm feeling something that doesn't make me feel well. And so is my brother and sister. So I know that I'm just one person. That's when you get older, you start realizing, hey, man, I'm not an octopus. Like I don't have 5 or 6 arms to go at this with. So even for the last 2 or 3 months, I've had to pull back for a second and reassess resources in the whole nine. It's been trying times, but oh my goodness, has it made me just okay, when I recover, and that's why I said on my thing, when I come back around, I'm a light resplendent. I've been really pushed away from this source because I'm so fucking close. When I seen the keyhole, I got hit so hard with this geometry and it knocked my framework out. Some people could call it a humbling experience because you just felt so inadequate to use the words. That's what I mean by the words. It was to comprehend what you were looking at. English wasn't going to do it. And nothing you had learned on this planet yet was going to do it. And to really feel that, you just felt so cheated. You just felt all of what you should be learning, you haven't even started yet. And then, but you come back rejuvenated. It's that moment, it's like a spike in your frequency. And you're like, whoa, I need to wake up. There is seriously something out there with a more advanced state. And it's possible, much more plausible than anything that we're actually dealing with here, that if we can tap its mind, we can find the way out. And that's all I have to say. So that's why I go in. So somebody said, well, why are you going in that many times? Isn't that all crazy? It's because I'm mining for some data that we desperately need to cancel time. So I have my objective. I have my, what they call that, set your intentions, set your intentions. Those are my intentions. And we're getting, as you can see with the message and what's been progressively delivered, that we're getting closer and closer to we're right in the face of it.
Well,
so
intentions are everything. And I think that people are starting to realize that whatever they do to others, they're actually doing to themselves. They've actually scientifically proven this. Another point I wanted to mention was the fact that we have biochemicals that are released every time we feel a certain emotion. Along with that, the biochemical release actually tells your body and your brain to keep feeling that way. And it keeps a cycle going that if you're depressed, you're going to keep feeling depressed because you're just adding on negative energy over and over again. It's like a cycle that just repeats itself. And people are finding that whenever they invest positive energy and release positive emotions, those biochemicals change to positive ones. And so it encourages the body to be well and to feel good. And that continues on a good cycle. In the last couple minutes of the show, what are you working on right now?
Well,
everything.
Well, what happened now is that I really feel like that where I can make the most progress in what I'm dealing with now is to invent some things. So I'm actually in the process and actually at the closing part of the research and development on creating things that actually power your auric field. So it's basically, it uses your own energy to power you. So it's basically, it can ping back your own energy. So let's say, for instance, it's It's like perpetual motion, but they always say it's never perpetual because you must hit it first. You must tap it. And so this is how it works. Like once you tap yourself, it just basically swings back on a consistent basis, delivering energy back into the auric field, which basically allows you to develop a shield. And it's a shield in a sense to where it repels disharmonic. And that's just by the laws of, what they would say is physics. And then what it does is that on the radonic level, like basically the realm that doesn't exist in time, is it makes other things mimic it. It mimics its perfection. Just like what we would all, like if we see something that's greater, let's say, for instance, a better idea, we tend to actually try to go with that idea. We see a better something. If we have access to it, we tend to try to mimic it. So that's what it does. It works on mimicking. And it's real. Like this is like 5 years. And also the weird thing is that it's been progressively getting to this point, and there's actually nothing that I'm doing to determine when we're going to be complete. But I know it's going to be complete in the next 2 months. And this was after 6 years of that whole process of, okay, now you're going to study radonics. Okay, now you're going to study cymatics. Okay, now you're going to study just water. Oh, here's the last thing. There was one little thing. I'm glad I remembered this because there was one thing that some certain people were going back and forth with me about. Because I didn't have enough data, I had to actually desist of whether I was right or not about it because I just didn't have enough data, even though I felt intuitively because of my own experience that it was true. And this was about distilled water. And this was about, because many aren't distilled water, if distilled water can leach minerals out of the body. Okay,
wow.
Now I make this very fast. So some people that, they were diehard distilled water people, they were like, no, it can't. I don't know why you're telling people that. That's not possible. You can't leach minerals out of your body. You get minerals from all over the place. You don't need to add minerals to your water. Okay,